All right, welcome back, fellow coders, to this Spring Boot / React.js series where we are going to build a web app from scratch. In this episode, we are going to be diving further into our React portion of the application. We're going to try to get React communicating with our backend appropriately without having any sort of authentication issues. So the goal is to get the front end to talk with the back end. So if that sounds like it is of interest to you, stick around and we'll get right into it. All right, let's get started. So the app here, as we've done in the previous video, is very boring. All it says is hello world, but we want to do something a little bit different. Obviously, we want it to be able to communicate with our back end, our running Spring Boot application, which reminds me, the Spring Boot application isn't currently running, I don't think. So I need to go over to my Eclipse environment and run this assignment submission app. So it needs to be running and ready to accept incoming requests. So there we go. Now it's started up. So to keep things straight in our minds, the React app here is running on localhost port 3000, and the web side of things, the REST controller, RESTful web service, if you will, the Spring Boot app is running on port 8080. So from a practical standpoint, those are two different URLs. Okay, one is port 3000, one is port 8080. Even though they both say localhost, for the simplicity's sake, those are essentially two different URLs. It's like having Google.com and Facebook.com, two separate URLs. So that's what we have going on here. So we want the localhost 3000 to talk to localhost 8080. We'll start by hard coding some stuff, and then as we go, we will refactor things nicely so that we're not, hard coding something like localhost 8080 or whatever, because it's not always going to say localhost 8080 when this app is actually deployed onto the interwebs. So how do we get that to work? Well, with React, you can, inside of the scope of the app, the function that defines this entire sort of class, if you will. It's like a functional component or stateless component. So that's we'll talk more about that also in the future. But basically, we want this to be able to communicate with our backend, maybe on load. So in order to have it communicate on load, this is sort of where you type, sort of. The app here, the code will be rendered or interpreted and then executed from top to bottom. So if you put just like a console log statement here and said hello and save that, if we jump over to our application over here, go to the console, and let me close this, you'll see it says hello. So hello is there. So if we refresh the page, it'll say hello, hello. So that's sort of on load. There's a bit more to it than that, but let's stay simple. We'll start simple, and then we'll gradually evolve to get more and more complex as we move forward. So if this is where the app runs code when it loads up, we can put a statement in here. So in order to communicate from the front end, which is the React app, to the back end, there's many different mechanisms that you can use, many different libraries and whatnot, but one that's just built into JavaScript, not even just React, but JavaScript, is called fetch. Fetch is a function that returns something called a promise. It returns a response. And the promise you can then execute when it comes back with the data. So the fetch goes out to, fetch data or, do whatever that it needs to do to communicate with the backend, with the RESTful web service. So front end communicates to back end then responds to the front end with some sort of data, with some sort of response, right? So in this case, we want to say, hey, I don't know, I want to see if I can get my JSON web token, or I want to see if I can, collect some data, do a GET request or something. So in order for that to do it, fetch is an asynchronous function, which means that JavaScript doesn't pause and wait for the fetch function to complete itself. It doesn't, kick off the fetch, wait for fetch to go, talk to the server, wait for the server to generate what it needs to do and generate, and then throw back the response, and then fetch receives the response, and then JavaScript moves on to the next line of code. No, that would be synchronous coding. Synchronous means it pauses and waits for each line to finish before it moves on to the next line. This is asynchronous, which just blows people's minds if you have been a coder working solely in the world of synchronous coding. Switching to asynchronous can melt your brain. So just know asynchronous means it's going to execute this line of code, and before it's done finishing executing the code, it's going to go down to the next line of code. So fetch is the function that we are going to invoke. Fetch takes in two parameters. The first is the URL, and the second is essentially the the rest of the details, the body of it, the what's it called? The stuff that goes along with that request, right? So what is that called? With the header and the body together, I guess it's just the request itself. So okay, so what is the URL that we're going to be fetching, right? And again, fetch is not the greatest word because it's really communicating with or sending a request to. Excuse me. So for us, it's going to be, again, we're hard coding this. Localhost 8080 is our back end. That is the Java server over here. And the Java server has one auth controller that's listening on API/auth/login. So we can do a post to /login because it's a post mapping, right? So again, localhost 8080 /API/auth, copy, paste, API/auth/login is this one, and it needs to be a post. So if we just did this, if we just did this fetch and that's it, it's not going to work. So we can save our code, and you'll see on this end there's a warning, and it says request method get not supported is the warning that we get. And in here we get a stack trace in our application, our front end. What's this called? The browser. It says, hey, access the fetch, blah blah blah. Well, actually, it's been blocked. So there's a separate issue here, which is a CORS policy, which again, that's sort of what we're gonna have to solve in this video. I can't remember off the top of my head how to do that, but that's okay. We can figure that out with some Googling. So there's two problems here going on. The first is we don't have a GET request, right? This is the post mapping, which is a post request, but we don't have a GET request in here. So how do we first make it a GET request? And then we'll talk about the CORS thing in a moment. So when you do a fetch like this and just pass in the URL, the default functionality is that it's executing a GET request. So when it comes to the web, there are, well, probably 4 popular types of HTTP requests. One is GET, one is POST, another is PUT, and another is DELETE. Those 4 represent essentially the CRUD functionalities: creating, reading, updating, and deleting data. Okay, so I won't dive too far into that, but by default, it's doing a GET request, which is a read. It's trying to read data, but it says, nope, we don't have a GET request. So how do you fix that? Well, that's where this next one comes in, this next parameter that we pass in. So this one you can pass in, I believe, an object, right? So we pass in an object is just 2 curly brackets next to each other. That's the JavaScript notation for an object. And then this takes keys and values. So just like a hash map or a map in the world of Java, it takes keys and values. So one key is the, I believe it's headers. Is it headers? And headers is an object. And then it also has a, what is it? Method? Method is post, right? So we're saying post to this endpoint, and we want to send along some headers. The headers that we want to send along are the, what you call it, application. We want it to be rendered as JSON. What is that application? Wow, it's been so long since I've done this that I can't recall. Oh, this is so. If I was in an interview right now, I would get destroyed because this is things that this is again. Hopefully, this gives you hope. I have 15 years of experience coding, and I can't remember for the headers when I wanted to tell it to do the type of JSON, application JSON. I can't remember the key. The value is like application JSON or whatever, but the key for that I can't recall. So application JSON is the HTTP header. Hopefully that's enough. Content type. Ugh, content type. So the content type is going to be application slash JSON. That's going to say that our request to the server, our post request to the server, should be interpreted as JSON. This is a JSON request. In other words, not a default of text or HTML. We're not sending text or HTML and expecting a response of text or HTML. When you interact with a RESTful web service, typically the RESTful web service will return an object in the form of JSON. So it's going to be application JSON is the response type, the content type. So content type, application JSON, and then method is post. So now if I go back to our other tab and save this, we should see, did nothing happen? I saved it. Normally it then executes it. So if I refresh, so we still have the error. I was expecting the CORS error to come up. But yeah, we don't have the other error. We don't have the method, get method, whatever, not found, because it's being blocked. So it's being blocked. So this is the second problem that we've run into. So the first problem was we were setting it as a get request, not a post request. So now it's changed the code. It's removed my string double quotes around the headers and just changed it to normal, headers. If I put the strings back and then save, you see it strips it away. So I guess that's my code prettier thing at work. But anyway, this is being blocked because there's something called CORS, which is cross-origin resource sharing. Cross-origin resource sharing. Anyway, cross-origin means across two different URLs. So that's why I mentioned at the beginning, these are two different URLs. Even though they're both localhost, it's, for all intents and purposes, different URLs, because one is port 3000, the other is port 8080. So because of that, this is being blocked in the browser. So the Google Chrome or WebKit browser that I'm using is stopping the request from happening. So this fetch is not able to do its job. So how do we fix that? How do we fix cross-origin resource sharing block, React JS maybe is one way to do it. So if I make this a bit bigger, React CORS guide, what it is and how to enable it. How to allow CORS in React. Maybe we'll Stack Overflow. That's probably a shorter and to the point type article. There are 6 ways to do it in React. Okay, cool. So you can configure CORS on the server side. So we can do this. I thought there was a simpler way though. Set headers manually. Okay, we can do that, but I don't want to do that. Bypass, use proxy. Yes, okay, this is what I want to do. Oh, only for development. So this doesn't work in production. Okay, so fair enough. This is the solution that I've seen other people use in other tutorials because it's quick and dirty. It allows you to go into something called package.json, which is right here. And in your package.json file, you just add in a key and value for proxy, right? So I don't think there's a proxy in here right now. Is there a key called proxy? I don't see it. So I've seen other people do this where they say proxy, and then they say HTTP : and then they say localhost 8080, I think is the value that you use, and then follow it with a comma. I believe that solves the problem, at least from what I've seen in the past, it solves the problem. Was it, maybe localhost 8080, was it 3000 instead? Or do I have to reboot the server? I think I have to reboot the server if I change this. By the server, I mean the running, server. This guy. So I control C and I say terminate yes. And then I go back and npm start again. Take a sip of coffee. All right, so now it's fired back up. When I go F12, is the error gone? Oh, it still is not gone. I access the fetch. I would need to do a bit more reading on the proxy. So in your package.json, only for if this is your API, HTTP : blah 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 blah, right? Add this part to your package.json proxy, and then HTTP blah 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 port 7000. So that is actually what I did, right? Proxy, HTTP : localhost 8080. Oh, did I miss the /? Is this a / issue? I don't know. We'll find out. So that didn't work. Again, I will try to restart the development server to see if that makes a difference. So let me just read through and then make your request with the next parts of the API. Oh, I see. You don't actually hard code in the HTTP : / part. Okay, so I'm hard coding in the HTTP : / part. So it's still causing an error. So you have to go back to your app.js and you omit all this stuff and you just have the /API or whatever. So cool. Now we have bad request. So that's a different issue. So in other words, we were able to send our request through to the server. So the server received the request almost, but then gave us a bad request exception saying, hey, the body is missing. And that's true. We're not passing in the body that it expected, which is the auth credentials request object. So when we were posting here, it allowed us now to talk to this backend, which is great. But we did not pass in a proper request, which is we should have passed in a username and a password. So let's do that now. So the one caveat that I will leave you with here is, like this article said, although that was a simple solution, the article said only for development, right? Now, I don't know if they go on to explain why this is only for development, but there is a solution on the server side. So the better long-term solution is to configure CORS in the server side. We will have to do that in a future video. It's just a matter of using some annotations to, say that we are accepting requests from certain URLs, right? So from the server side, we say, if anything comes from localhost 3000, it is okay. That's basically what we need to set up. And if we had any other environments, any other URLs, like let's say we had another dev URL, like dev.coderscampus.com or something, you would also allow those requests to come in as well, dev.coderscampus.com, okay? Once we get to the full production version of this, so we launch the production version, this proxy doesn't work anymore because the proxy no longer is localhost 8080. Now the proxy is going to be the exact same URL, because if they're both launched into production, meaning the same server, they're both going to be coderscampus.com. So then you don't need a proxy. So anyway, one thing that we can also do from the front end here is we can make a different package JSON that is for the production environment only. So we can have a prod version of our package JSON. So there are many ways to solve this problem. I don't have any opinions on what the best way to do it is. This was pretty simple. I do kind of like this because then in your code where you're doing fetch requests, you don't have to hard code in this part. You don't have to put in the URL at all. So that's kind of nice. So anyway, let's get back to what I was talking about, which was what? Right, we need to add a body for our here. So we don't have a body declared. So how do we do that? Well, it's another key value pair. Body is the key, and then the value is you want to pass a JSON string, right? So normally you have a string. I wouldn't say normally. One thing you might think is to have a string here, and then you put your JSON data here. Data here. But this is not. It's a bit clunky and not great. So what I like to do instead, or what most people show you, is instead of just hard coding your object in here, create your object up here. So you can create an object like request body, and you can create your object here, right? And remember, it needs a username of something. We'll say Trevor, and a password, which we'll put like ASDF because I think that's the actual username password that works. And then this request body object that we've created, we can inject it in here, kind of. We put request body. This almost works. However, this does not get turned into a JSON string. So you need to add one more call to something called json.stringify. So when we do json.stringify, stringify is a method or function that we're calling, which turns a regular old object, a JavaScript object, into JSON, a JavaScript object notation, which is a string. Okay, so we're stringifying the request body, which is here. So we're passing along a username and password, which is correct, and we're sending that to the login API on our server side with the correct details for the login information. So if all goes well, we should hopefully get we'll probably just not get a response at all. So probably nothing's going to happen in the console. So let me save. and see what happens in the console. Nothing happened in the console, which is what I expected. On the server side, we see that some selects happen, and this is actually a good thing, okay? So the auth controller actually returns here in our response entity, we return in the body the user details, and in the header, we return the JSON web token. However, excuse me, we don't see that here on the front end. Why not? Well, remember what I said about fetch? Fetch returns a promise. Okay, so fetch will return something. The promise is returned, and the promise will fully be executed, will resolve once the server has finished sending the data back from the server side. However, we're not handling that right now on the front end. We haven't handled the server's response. Okay, we have started the fetch request. We sent a message saying, hey, here's my data. I want you to try to log me in. But then we just stop listening for a response. So how do you listen for the response? You say dot, then in the after the round bracket part of the fetch. In other words, this is the method that we're executing, that we're invoking, and then after we invoked a method, we can say dot then. So then we can have a response. So there's a response here that we can log to our console if we want. Right, so if I hit go, boom, I saved. Now look, we have this response. So there's a response object, and this response object, inside of it has a body and headers. So we want to have a look at the body and the headers, right? Let's say response dot, headers? Save that and see, boom, we have headers, right? Now, I don't know how to look at the headers. We need to turn... I guess we need to render it as JSON, I guess. So how do we convert this to JSON? I guess we can turn the whole response into JSON. So there's a method that we can call, I think it's just, is it just JSON? No. Shoot, I haven't done this in so long. There's a method that we can call to turn it into JSON. Response.json? Is that right? I think so. Response.json turns it, so this also returns a promise. So it doesn't just return it right away, it returns a promise, which means we need to chain another dot then in here, and then that should return the actual data of the response. So I usually call this data, doesn't matter what you call it, but I think data is a good enough thing. So, okay, so now let me clear this and refresh the page. So now we see we have a response, right? We can open this up and look at it, and look, we have authorities, we have the start date. So this is the user itself. So it has successfully returned the user. However, what we don't have here is we don't have the header data, right? So response JSON, I want to get access to the header data as well. So that's something that I don't usually do. I need to look that up really quickly. So in, let's see, fetch, get access to headers from response, because it's the response headers. So response.headers. Let's have a look. Fetch my request, then response.headers returns a headers object. Blob, then function. Here's the, okay. So we did do response.headers and it didn't seem to love that. So how do we get access to, I want both data points down here. I guess I don't necessarily need both data points. I can wrap this in a scope, curly bracket scope here. And I can say return response.json. So this is exactly the same thing. This code that I've now typed in, this extra code, will do the identical thing as we had before. So if I come and save, you'll see that if I clear the log and start again, nothing's changed. It still returns the exact same stuff. But what I can also do here is say response.headers, right? And I can assign this to a headers variable. And then can I say like headers dot, what is it? What is the server side header authorization? So I want to take a peek at the authorization. Can I do a console log on this? Is that going to work? Okay. Undefined. Okay, let me just do a log on headers. So the headers is empty, but then it has this prototype, right? So keys, maybe I can say headers.keys. Still undefined. So there's some, okay, for each set, what about, oh, that's keys. Sorry, I mistyped the word keys. Good, okay, so there are keys. Dot for each, maybe? Key. Oh, and I don't want a console log. I want a console log in here. A key. Is that gonna work? Type error headers keys is not a function. Keys. I guess keys is it's returning the function. So let me just Google it. I can do this all day, but React read header data from response. How to get response body and response headers. Response.json, then response JSON, use response. In order to get them in one place with plain ES6 promises, there should be either nested thens or multiple values. Oh, interesting. Promise.all. This.use response. So return response.json, then. So let's try that out. Again, normally I don't try to get access to the headers because I don't really care about the headers. So let me format my code again to go back to how we started, which is just returning the response. And then I'll try to use their code here, which is this.use response. Although, is this because he has it in his code, the use response method? I don't know what use response is. I guess, is that built in? And we're also saying this, which we can't say this in a functional component. Easiest way I see is to send the header to the send request function. To the send request function, which is this. Okay. Or multiple values passed. We might want to do promise.all. And then have both. I think that's the better way to do it, in my opinion, for what we have here. So instead of saying response.json, we can say promise all, right? Promise.all, which means get all of the promises here and pass in both. Because I guess response.headers returns a promise. Is that true? I don't see that it returns a promise. Okay, so then instead of just data, it is the the body, comma, the headers. Can I say headers? We'll see. And then here we can say console log headers. See if that works. Okay. It's still undefined though, so it could just be that I have no headers. Is that? I mean, that seems like the most likely thing here, that the code's not working. It feels like there are no headers, because I mean, look, response entity.ok, header, the given single header value, and it's gonna be authorization. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to get access to this token. That's all I want, right? Just give me that token in the response, and give me access to it. So I'm passing it back. One thing I can do is just to see, like, is it actually null? So I can go to my, if I make this a little bigger, I can go to my network tab, network, and then actually look at the request that I'm making, right? Which is the login fetch. So let's have a look at this. So it's doing the post, response headers. Yeah, look, authorization. So the response headers are there, and it is returning the what I want to see. This is what I want. I want this guy. This is our JSON web token. This is where the magic happens, right? And it's in that response. It's in that response. It's in, so they're the headers. Response headers are there. Okay, so I'm missing something. That's all right. We're on a learning journey, folks. Oh, they wrapped it in, oops, it's an array. It's an array. So what I did here is, you see they have this extra square bracket that wraps these two variables. I pass them in. So it's really just one variable being returned, one parameter, but the one parameter is an array, which is not what I have here. I'm asking for two parameters. So this body will have a value in it, but the value of this body is going to be an array of two items, and headers is going to be undefined, which is exactly what I saw. So if I wrap this like so, and then can I destruct like that? Can I just say headers? I'm not sure if I can even do that. Let me go to the console. Again, I get the same response. Okay. Use response is what they're still saying. I don't think we can do... Okay, show me what use response does. Can I say use... No, there is no use response. I don't... That must be code that someone else has written. So... Because if I say headers dot, what can I do with this? For each? Right? And I tried that. I tried to say headers dot for each, but it was an object, right? So if headers is an object, objects are just keys and values, right? So can I say keys? Because really, I just want to say headers dot authorization, right? So maybe headers dot authorization, still undefined. How do I look at that? This says prototype headers, right? I don't... Values. Just says native code, right? Because I want to say for each. Which I tried last time and it didn't work, right? For each. So for each header, headers dot... Interesting. It put dot array first, dot for each. Is that right? I don't know. Let's find out. Element. So let's log the elements. Did it accidentally give me the right code? No. So uncaught in promise cannot read properties of undefined reading for each. So the dot array doesn't work. And headers dot for each. There we go. Yes, exactly. Well, this didn't... Okay. So... Now we have access to the data. So there's got to be a better way to get access to that. So let me think. So if each of these, so this is headers is an object. So we should be able to destruct this object, deconstruct it into its. So we should be able to say const authorization equals headers, right? And then, hold on. Oops. What am I doing? Get rid of that. And then, hold on. So how do you destruct again? Oh my God, guys, it's been so long. And then, so this is there, and then this needs to have brackets like this. And then we should be able to say log authorization, right? Refresh, undefined. Headers is here. If we do this operation and console log that, it just gives us the same prototype stuff. How do we get access to... Now, when we saw the... when we did an iteration through that for each that we had, for each... So headers dot for each element, right? So we were outputting the element. I don't see... Do I see the word authorization anywhere in here? No, which is odd. because I would have expected to see keys and values, right? Element dot, what? Key, can I say that? No, that just says undefined. So each element, so headers for each, so for each individual element, I mean, I see it right here, right? And I want to get access to that. But how do we get access to that inside of all of this stuff? Because in the network tab, when you look at the header response, there's the access control allow headers, there's authorization. So do we see, like, it looks like it's getting rid of all the keys. And when we said keys dot for each, that was not cool? No. Okay, so let's see. Fetch, headers, read, headers, response. Reading response headers with the fetch API. Restriction to access response headers when you use fetch over CORS. Oh, look at that. When you're writing, interesting. There's a restriction to access response headers. That could be why I'm struggling a little bit, but I do have access to, more than this stuff. So that's not exactly true. Response headers get. So it's saying I can say headers dot get. Oh man, this would be. This is going to be embarrassing if this is the solution, right? Because that's pretty darn simple. I should have thought of that. That's all right. Again, hopefully this is, what's the word? Hopefully, oh, there it is. Ugh. That's good though. We figured it out. Hopefully this is reassuring to you. This is how the cookie crumbles. Okay, beautiful. So now we have access to both the body and the headers. Let me just make sure that we also have access to the body. I'm pretty sure we do. Yeah, so the body's there, that's here, and the header is here as well. So, cool. That's how you get access to header information, headers.get. And then you get the key, or you get based on the key, and then that returns the value, and then you can get the value. So, beautiful. We can get our JSON web token now, and we can store that somewhere, and that's something we'll tackle in a bit. But I do want to dive into maybe more thing. I want to mention one more thing, I should say. Have you been noticing when I refresh, there's hello, and then this fetch happens, and then it looks like the fetch happens again, right? So why does it seem like it's happening twice? That's a bit odd. So this has something to do with, although I would have expected to see hello twice. Does it say number 2 around hello? No, it does not. This is something that React does. It reacts to changes. And when it reacts to changes, it re-executes code appropriately. So that's a concept that I haven't talked about with React, and I will. The solution is to this problem is to leverage something called a use effect hook. So we'll talk about use effect hooks maybe in the next lesson, and we'll talk about what did I just talk about? What did I say what I want to talk about? About storing? Did I say storing? So we need to store this data, right? This data here that we're getting back from our server side, we would like to store it for later use. And then also, yeah, we need to figure out why is this happening twice? Because we don't want it to fetch the data twice. That's not what we expect to happen. I also want to talk about that with the use effect hook, and I guess we can do that in the next lesson. So thank you so much for joining. As always, if you like the video, give it a like. If you enjoy seeing me struggle, and it gives you reassures you that even if I'm struggling, that means it's okay for you to struggle as well. That is the goal of this video. If you're loving it, yeah, give the video a like, and obviously if you enjoy this stuff and want to see the next lesson when it comes out, please do subscribe to get notified of that. So looking forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Take care of yourselves. Happy learning, and bye for now.